I'd like to bring up a couple of our special guests. So please help me welcome Joe Mantegna. And Ricky J. So I'd like to start at the beginning, and if you could both tell us, how did you meet David Mamet?
You met him first.
Actually, I met David in, I believe it was about 1974, or 3 or 4 in Chicago, both being from Chicago. I had been a student at the Goodman School of Drama at the time, which was located in the Art Institute of Chicago back then. There we go. And as I recall, I was coming there to visit someone at the school, a teacher maybe or something, and the school is underground because if you any buildings west of Michigan Avenue has to be underground, can't be a certain height, so everything's underground. So I remember going down these long steps to get down to the theater, and there was this guy coming up the stairs. And he was very nattily dressed with a scarf and a tweed coat. And I thought, for a young guy, the guy was kind of dressed pretty sharp. And I remember passing him, and I remember him saying to me, he says, "Oh, excuse me." He says, "My name is David Mamet. I saw you in this play that you're doing." I was with a group then called the Organic Theater Chicago. He says, "I saw you in your play. I think you're really good. I'm a playwright. Someday I'd love you to be in one of my plays." And I was like, "Yeah, cool, great." Just some guy, nice, as I recall, nice coat and a nice scarf, and that was how I met him, and it was like, it was funny. It was just like a few months later, I think it was, maybe a year later, that the theater I was at, the Organic Theater, decided they wanted to do one of his plays, which was Sexual Perversity in Chicago. As it turned out, I had already this was during our summer break with the theater company, like we would do a season and take the summer off. And I had gotten a job as the understudy for the play Lenny, the understudy to lead Lenny. And it was like, so here I was being offered this, to do this lead role in this new play by this new guy, David Mamet. But it was like, "Hey man, gee, I'd love to do your play, but I got this cool understudy job with this Broadway show. I really can't do it, So it's really one of my great regrets in life that I never got to be to originate the role in that play. But thank God he didn't hold it against me, and I wound up doing other things for him, obviously, from that point on. But that's really where it started.
Okay. Ricky?
Well, I guess, can you hear me? Is this on?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I have no idea. Electronics, not my strength. I met David, I couldn't be more different, many years later, actually not so long before this film. And it was through a mutual friend named Jules Fisher, who's probably the most famous lighting designer in Broadway, still is. And he had a lifelong dream of creating a permanent variety theater. And for some odd reason, he got it in his head that the people he wanted to have do this were Mike Nichols, David, and myself. And we never got to do this theater, but in the course of this, he and Lindsay talked about bringing me east to meet David for his birthday. I think it's when Glengarry was playing, when you were in Glengarry on Broadway. And that's the first night that I met you as well. I went to David's house in New York, and Lindsay convinced me to do a performance. I almost never work private shows, but needless to say, this was too good a chance to turn down. And that's how I met David, and we kind of instantly hit it off. And the next thing he did was ask me to come to teach, be a lecturer to his theater group at the Goodman. And I said, I don't know anything about acting. I've never acted in anything. And he said, what you do is exactly what actors do. And so I went to the Goodman with him, and from there, the next thing that happened is after spending a week with his students at the Goodman, he decided that he'd like to do a show about confidence games and asked me if I might want to write that with him. Again, I mean, can you imagine anything more remarkable than that? And then a couple of weeks later, he said, you know, I realize I have a story with Jonathan Katz about a con game, a story that would make a wonderful movie, and I'd like to do that. And I said, I understand. And then he said, well, I'd like you to play a part in it. And I said, well, you don't have to offer me that just because we're not going to be able to write this together. And he said, Ricky, I've been wanting to make a movie for a decade. I'm not going to stick you in it just to save face. I'd really like you to be in the film. And this is the first time I ever acted in a film.
Oh, Joe, how did you first hear about House of Games?
Well, this was 1984, and I was doing the play, the original, I feel like DJ Cobb now, because there's the second revival of Glengarry Glen Ross that just opened last Saturday in New York, so they've done it twice since I first did it. But I was doing the play Glengarry Glen Ross in New York in 1984, and then what happened is that ran for, I mean, it was a big thing for me. I mean, the show won a Pulitzer Prize, I won the Tony Award, it really changed my whole life. But about a year later, then we did the national tour of it, and I was touring the country with it, with Peter Falk and a lot of the actors that you saw in this movie were in it, Jack Wallace, among others, J.T. Walsh. And we were on the road, I don't know where we were, San Francisco, Boston, somewhere doing the play, and Mamet came into my dressing room. And he's a man, just like his dialogue, he's a man of few words. I mean, he just gets right to the point. He walked in my dressing room, and he walks up to me and goes, I want to tell you something, I just sold the rights to Glengarry Glen Ross, the movie. You're not doing it. It's like, yeah, okay. He said, yeah, the guy that bought it, he's already got Pacino attached, so that's it. You know, that's the way it's going to go. And I was like, you know, okay, Dave. You know, I was, you know, I would have loved for him to have said something else. You know, like, yeah, you are doing it, but you know, I knew, you know, that Carol Channing didn't do Hello Dolly and things like that. So there's a history of you can create a role on Broadway and not necessarily make the movie. So I mean, I was a little disappointed, but it was like, okay. But the next thing he said was he had a briefcase with him, and he opened up the briefcase, and he pulled out 2 scripts. And one script was the movie House of Games, and the other script was a movie called Things Change. And he laid both those scripts on my table in my dressing room, and he said, you're not doing the movie Glengarry, but I won't make these 2 movies without you. And I was like, I mean, I hadn't read him yet, I didn't know what he was talking about, but it was like, whoa, okay, thanks, Dave, you know. But I mean, in retrospect, I think about it, and I think I mean, it just goes to show what kind of an honorable human being this guy is. I mean, he somewhat felt that, you know, he couldn't help me out in this one thing, but that he was going to take care of me in this other thing, and he was true to his word, and I wound up making both those films. But that's how I found out about House of Games and Things Change.
You know, that's a thing David has always done. It's fascinating. There are people who are acting students of his who even say, well, I'm going to do a movie in a couple of years, and you'd be perfect as the chorus girl in this film. And 7 years later, he would do the film, and the person he had told that to would be the chorus girl in the film. I mean, he did that repeatedly through his career.
So I get a lot of old chorus girls in his movies.
And all with you in a hot tub, as I recall. You and Donna Meachit.
Right.
So when you read a new David Mamet screenplay or stage play for both of you, and you know you have a part in it, what's that experience like?
Well, you know, his stuff is very difficult. It's difficult for a lot of different reasons. It's difficult as an actor to, mainly because, as you can imagine, there's not a lot of ad-libbing going on. You know, there are writers I've worked with, Woody Allen even, Coppola, that they encourage it. Barry Levinson, they encourage you to kind of, yeah, got a little input, you want to try something, try it. You know, Dave is a little different. You know, he writes, the guy writes in iambic pentameter, so unless you have a command of that, you know, it makes it a little tricky to come up with another, hey Dave, let's try this line instead. So that in itself, you know, makes it a little different. But I remember when I first got the script to Gary Glenn Ross, when he sent it to me, he says, yeah, I got this new play, thinking of taking it to Chicago, maybe taking it to Broadway, and, you know, I'd like you to play this part, check it out. And I read it. Now, I had never lived in a house in my entire life at that point. I always lived in apartments. My father never owned a home. So I didn't know anything about real estate. I didn't know what leads were. I didn't know any of the terminology in that play. And of course, in his terminologies tends to be, his dialogue is so intricate and interesting anyway. And here he's throwing out these words about leads and blah, blah, blah. And so I read it, and I didn't know what the hell it was about. So he called me the next day, and he said, so, the play, how'd you think of the play? And I was like, you know, Dave, I didn't get to it. You know, I lied. I told him I hadn't read it yet. I says, no, you know, I'm going to get to it. I got busy. I'll get to it, because I had to I called guys that knew real estate. I said, what's a lead? What's a, you know, and they explained it to me. And then it was like, okay, it was like deciphering another language. Then when I kind of figured out okay, this guy's a salesman, okay, lead, blah, 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 blah. So I had to do, you know, we did a lot of research. But what was great is when we wound up doing the play on Broadway, we did a lot of research even in the rehearsal period. They brought in different salesmen to talk to us. And they brought in one guy that sold millions and millions of dollars worth of paper products. You know, that was his job. He'd go to like General Motors, and he'd be the guy that would sell them all the paper that they use. So we're talking $1 million accounts. And it was interesting to hear him talk, but the woman that I learned the most from, and was most beneficial, is they brought in a fuller brush lady. And this woman comes in, the difference is she's making like, you know, 75 cents every time she sells a brush. This woman was a much better salesperson than the guys making $1 million sales, because her commission, she's got to, you know, always be closing. She constantly had to be selling. So she would set up scenarios with us, the cast, of like, your job is to be the customer. I'm going to be the sales lady. Your job is to try not to buy a brush from me. And I swear within 5 minutes she had all of us, oh, okay, Jesus Christ. I'll take 2, you know. But, so I mean, that was fascinating in itself. So all of these things, that you explore these worlds with David. I mean, that essence, in a sense, it was real estate, House of Games, it was the con, having Ricky there. I mean, when you saw me do that little coin trick, I mean, there is that one edit in there you see, but I worked on that for a long time, and Ricky did his best to kind of, because Ricky can do it, no edit, you know. That coin is there and then not there. But to be able to delve into that world was fascinating as well. So, I mean, so working for David is always, you're working for one of the premier writers of the 20th century, without question. So, I mean, it's always an adventure.
Ricky, how about you when you get a screenplay for the first time?
Well, my
you know you have a
situation
part?
is pretty different because I'm not the lead in these things. So when I first read them, I have to figure out which character he's envisioned for me. And I eventually began to realize, I think I've been in 7 or 8 of his films now, that he knew that I hated hats. So I would wait until I saw a character wearing a hat, and that was my part.
No, I saw a Q&A that David did for The Verdict, and someone asked him about improvisation, and he said that improvisation became a big thing in the 70s, and actors always want to do it, and he said he allows it in his movies, you know, when you're filming, and he said, however, inevitably the actors go back to the text because I can write a hell of a lot better than they can improvise.
There's actually one word in House of Games that I changed, but I asked him, and there was a scene, as I believe, I didn't catch the whole movie tonight, and it's been years since I've seen it, but it's when Lindsay and I walk out of the Western Union office, and I'm talking to her after we've met Bill Macy, and I kind of showed her what that con is like. I think the line as he wrote it was, "Don't trust anybody." And I, you know, I learned it as I learned everything else. But I said to him, I said, Dave, you know, and I felt like, oh my God, this is. I'm actually going to ask David if I could change a word. But I says, you know, Dave, I just really think Mike Mancuso would say, "Don't trust nobody." And I was thinking, geez, there's one less syllable. This is gonna really fuck him up, you know. But surprisingly enough, he went, okay. Okay, and I was like, and I lived off that for years. Just like, yeah, all right, I changed the David Mamet line. You know, I'm going to put my signature on that line. You know, don't trust nobody.